So, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the invitation to this prestigious event. I'm delighted to be here. My first trip to India enthralled me so far. I've only been here a couple of days. I'm looking forward to the next few days to find out more. It might be my first visit to India, but of course India's been a very, very important place for Airbus for many years. If we look back, India was one of our first primary customers. We delivered an A300 to you here in 1976, 300B4, serial number 182. So, one of the early customers for Airbus. When you look at the numbers of aircraft we've delivered now. Now we've got a very strong partnership, 7 Indian carriers, Jet Airways, Deccan, Indigo, Kingfisher, Go Air, Air India and Flyington. So, and the whole range of Airbus aircraft are set to fly with Indian carriers. And further to that, we see not only as a sales but also as a cooperation area, India's been very important to us. We've, a year ago roughly, set up the Airbus Engineering Centre here in Bangalore. We've got a joint venture activity on maintenance, repair and overhaul. We've got an Airbus Pilot Training Centre in Bangalore here. And we're looking at various R&T technology cooperation projects as well. So quite important to us. Now, just see if I can cancel that as well. Good. So, and actually the success story of Airbus in India has continued. We still see ourselves in a very strong position. If we look in the last 3 years, 347 orders into the Indian Airlines, 68% of the market. That for us represents a huge success and an ongoing activity and a huge commitment we see between the Indian Airlines and Airbus. We take that as an example, but now look at the whole Airbus story, if you like, in the picture. I joined, or rejoined Airbus, as you heard, only 7 or 8 years ago. For me, it's been an extraordinary business. I've watched it from inside originally, outside and back in again. And, it's gone from virtually nothing to what it is today in just over 30 years. In 2008, we delivered a new record number of 483 aircraft in the year. 30 more than in 2007, made up of 386 A320 aircraft, 85 A330 340s, and 12 A380s. Huge number of aircraft, I think, by any standard. And the order intake in what feels like a very difficult period, perhaps, was remarkably strong. Overall, we won 777 net orders, actually 900 new gross orders, valued at over $100 billion US in the year. That represents 54% of the market of over 100 seaters. In that, we've got 472 A320s, family aircraft, 138 long-range aircraft of the 330-340, and 9 more A380s. And to add to that, the recently launched A350 XWB won 163 orders in the year, increasing the total now to 478 orders from 29 customers, which actually makes it the fastest selling aircraft in aviation history. Huge success already. 2008 year end, Airbus had increased its backlog to a new record of 3,715 undelivered on-order aircraft, underlining the strong continued demand for the products. So, we see ourselves in a very strong position for the future and the present, if you like. And what I'm going to talk to you about now is some of the challenges, perhaps, that go with that. If we look at the future in the longer term, we've got to look at the general market situation. History has shown air traffic double by every, double in volume in terms of revenue passenger kilometres, roughly every 15 years. And the expectation is that will still continue. Latest studies still suggest that's the right trend, despite the current economic climate. history has shown that the dips have really been recovered typically, and I think the expectation is we'll do the same. So in the mid and long term, we expect to see that sort of trend continue. But we have to ask ourselves what future development looks like. The growing concern on environmental compatibility, and potentially, as we move forward, a potential non-availability or reducing availability of kerosene-based fuels. Just before we move on there, let's just look at that issue of the past economic crises. Actually, when you plot those onto the timeline, you can see the dips in each case, but they've been relatively minor. And even major things, the previous Gulf crisis, the World Trade Center attack, they've all resulted in dips and then recoveries. And actually, recoveries typically back to the line. Not a major stumbling block for us typically, as an industry, that is. Not Airbus typically, but as an industry. And then if we look at what analysts are saying about today's crisis, I think it's been a huge issue for pretty much the whole of the world. Certainly in Europe, we feel it in a very big way. The US is, talking to people in here in India, are starting to feel it. Perhaps not quite as dramatically as some areas, but it's certainly hitting home. But economy is a cyclical thing. History's shown that. We go through an upswing, a boom, recession, depression, whatever it might be. And also history has shown that we seem to get better at handling those recessions. The world monetary system, if you like, and government system actually manages the systems better. The economics of the world are better understood. And when we look, over periods, not only has there been less time spent in recession, but also the recessions have typically lasted a lot less, each individually. They've been shorter and shorter. Current predictions of our analysts are suggesting that the recovery will start sometime end of this year, early next year, and that complete recovery will be sometime in 2011. If you look at that in the long-term scale of, I was just showing the charts we're just looking at, yes, it's a dip, but we'll come out the other side is our belief. So why should airlines keep buying new aircraft? Well, obviously they need them for volume because of the growth's there. But also when we look at the general performance across airline fleets, it's a bit of a chart with no message until you start to really read into it. And when you actually start to look, you can see there are three sort of fairly distinct groups in this chart. You've got those airlines and those operating aircraft which are sort of less than 4 years old, perhaps, and they're seeing somewhere in the order of sort of 10 to 20% operating margin. I mean, it's generic, I know, but you can see the trends in there. If you look in the middle batch, those with the aircraft in the 4 to 10 years, and there we see a 0 to 10% operating margin. And for the older aircraft, well, that's where we see the struggles. We see the airlines who are in the sort of -10 to +5. So there's a strong suggestion that recent aircraft are really enabling airlines to be far more profitable. Given that, what does that mean for the distribution across the types and sizes? The bulk is always going to be in the smaller aircraft, single aisle aircraft. Many of those flying shorter range operations. Typically, we see something like 68% of the number of units, 16,600 aircraft over the next 20 years. Smaller volume of that on value. The twin aisles, something like 25% of the numerical value, and in the large aircraft 7%. But obviously the large aircraft are representing a significant contribution to market value in their own right. That represents nearly 1,700 very large aircraft, for example. Huge numbers. Put that together and you see a market value of $2.8 trillion. Huge numbers. So, what's the concern? It seems like a massive opportunity. Yes, I know there's a global issue at the moment, economy-wise, but in the long term, what are the issues? And one of the biggest issues we see is this continued pressure from the environment. Growing more and more, the environmental lobby is pushing the reduction in carbon emissions and in noise.